Hi everyone, it's Lauren and this is my September reading wrap-up. So I'm going to run through all of the books that I read in September and tell you what I thought of them. This has been a very Man Booker Prize heavy month, I'll be honest, especially the books that I finished. I'm currently reading quite a lot of books at once. But in terms of ones I've actually finished and can talk about today, they're all kind of Man Booker Prize related. And the only one that isn't is the first one that I finished, which is The Dumb House by John Burnside. And the way I justified reading this book in the midst of the Man Booker madness is that John Burnside is an actual judge for the Man Booker Prize this year. So I kind of thought, oh, this will be really interesting. Like if I can read some of his work, then maybe I'll get a clue into what he's looking for in works of fiction. This book is written incredibly beautifully, but it is equally very disturbing. Our narrator is very interested in the relationship between science and sort of the human soul, so he's obsessed with finding out where the soul resides in the body. He's interested in the difference and transition between life and death, and also about the innateness of language. All of this spurns from his mother telling him a story about the myth of the Dumb House when he's a child, which was a place where babies are raised by mute people, so they never hear any language, and the experiment was to whether they created their own means of communication or they created their own language to talk in. You start at the end of this book and then the story is told back to you, so this isn't a spoiler to say that our main character experiments on animals, and he also ends up experimenting on children, and it's very gruesome at times and worrying to read because he's a very unreliable narrator and he's justifying his work a lot of the time, and a lot of the language used and a lot of the observations that he comes up with are very, very beautiful and very interesting. So it's sort of unsettling to read, but so impressive, like how many different ideas are in this book. It's not very long, it's only about 200 pages, and it would certainly be a very interesting book to study. The second book that I finished in September was The Moor's Account by Lalami. This is a Man Booker Prize long-listed book, and it is historical fiction. This is the story of a failed expedition by Spanish conquistadors to what is modern-day Florida and Mexico, and only 4 people survived this expedition. And what we know of what happened on this expedition is from the account of the Castilian gentlemen who were there. There was also a Moroccan slave with them, and he is referenced in one line, just that there was also a Moroccan slave, Estebanico, who was with us. And that's it. So this is supposed to be the Moroccan slave's account. It gives him a life, a backstory, and a view on what's happening during this expedition, and it is supposed to kind of give him back his humanity and give him a voice. I will say now I'm not a massive reader of historical fiction, so although I thought this was okay, it really wasn't for me. I also don't know much about the history of this conquest. I hadn't heard about it before reading this book. So there is that element of it that I was kind of following a history that I didn't know myself, which made it feel kind of clinical and less like I was reading a fictional story where I was really engaged with the characters. I felt like more like I was being given a chronicle of, like a timeline of what was happening. Something that Holly at Library at the Edge of the World said when she reviewed this book, which I will link below if you want to go and see her video on it, is that she felt there was kind of a lack of emotional connection with the characters, and I would absolutely agree with that. I think it's a bit of a shame that the idea of this book is to give Estebanico his voice, and I just felt like there was no connection there, despite all of these awful things that are happening to them and the trauma of being a slave for one thing, and then surviving disease and war and voyaging to a new place. I just felt a bit, nah, like I didn't feel like I cared that much, and I can't work out why I felt that way, because it's not that it's badly written and it's not that it wasn't interesting, I just didn't feel engaged. So for me this was a bit disappointing. I think also because I was really looking forward to reading it, but really on completion I just don't think it's my taste. The next book I finished was Lila by Marilynne. This is a companion novel to Gilead, which I read last month. There are 3 books in this series of companion novels, Gilead, Home and Lila. Gilead is the first one, Lila is the third one. I haven't read Home. I still want to read Home, but the way that these books are written are that they do hold up as standalone novels, so the idea is you can read them in any order, I think, but I wanted to jump to Lila because it was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize and I wanted to read it before the shortlist announcement came out. I was a big fan of Gilead, and on reading this I'm still a big fan of Marilynne writing. I'm a little bit conflicted about this though. I'm surprised that it got longlisted, and that's not to say the writing isn't worthy of being longlisted, but the way I felt about this book was that it was almost just a companion to Gilead. I think if I just read this on its own, I wouldn't have been that blown away by it. But what I liked about it is because you're finding out about Lila, who is a character in Gilead, but this is her backstory. And I found that interesting, but only in context of Gilead, not in context of itself. I think the reason I was a bit disappointed is that Gilead isn't massively plot driven, but it is very, very philosophical. Lila's a little bit more plot driven because you're getting this backstory, but maybe due to the fact that Lila is quite a poor and uneducated character, it's a little bit less philosophical, and actually I felt a little bit less emotional. In Gilead I felt the relationships were very believable, the love between characters I found quite heartbreaking, and in Lila I felt like, maybe again with the Moor's account, I felt a little bit of distance there. I wasn't sure I believed that Lila loved people, and I don't actually think Marilynne Robinson's writing is any worse in this book at all. Perhaps it's just the way it's constructed, and perhaps it's because I'm viewing it in terms of Gilead. So for me this feels like a companion novel in the sense that you wouldn't read it if you hadn't read Gilead. Like, it doesn't feel like a companion novel that could be read on its own. I mean, it could be read on its own, don't get me wrong, that you don't need to read Gilead to read this. Just in terms of how much I enjoyed it, what I enjoyed was finding out about Lila and finding out how she got to the position that we see her in Gilead, and kind of joining the dots. So a really difficult one to define, because when I say I was disappointed, I only mean in comparison to Gilead, which I thought was incredible. So I would be really interested, if anyone's read this and not Gilead and Home, I'd be interested in what you thought of it. I'd also be interested if you've read Home, because I haven't read that one, so there is also a gap in my Gilead trilogy knowledge myself. So I think if you come at this from different angles, you're going to have a different interpretation of it. I'm going to stop rambling now because I keep trying to justify, like, I liked it, but I just didn't like it, and no one wants to listen to that. But yeah, I'm really pleased I read it, but just didn't quite get there for me. And finally, the big reason that I've only finished 4 books this month, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. And I just have one thing to say, which is why? Why, Hanya? Like, why did you want to do this to me? This broke me, this book. This is about 4 young men who are friends in New York. They're friends from college, and then you kind of see them throughout their whole lives. And although it is about all of them and about their extended friends and family, it mainly follows 2 of the characters, Jude and Willem, and their relationship. And even more so, specifically focusing on Jude, who is disabled. He has a problem with his leg. As the novel progresses, you find out why he's got so many injuries, and you find out some terrible things that happened to him when he was a child, and sort of how he copes and deals with that. The message of this book is very interesting because Jude has had to overcome some terrible things in his life. Bad things sort of continue to happen throughout his life, really. There are some really distressing things in this book, and it happens to all of them. But it kind of manages to walk the line between the idea that if something bad has happened to you or you get sick, there is hope that you can get better. But then it simultaneously contains the idea that actually some things you don't ever get over, and some people are sick and they are sick for their whole lives, chronically so. That doesn't mean you can't have happiness in your life, but you will always have to deal with that one thing. Some people can't be fixed if they are broken. But despite that message, it still remains hopeful in places. So it's very, very interesting to read. This is obviously a very, very long book, and kind of by the end of it you feel like you know the characters so well. Like, I feel like they're members of my own family. That is something that is incredibly impressive about this book, is the way all of her characters are so fully realised. It's amazing. Their personalities are so developed. You feel like you really understand them, but not only them as individual characters, how they relate to each other. So when the friends have a falling out, you can really understand how they've fallen out, because you can see exactly the points in each of their personalities where they would grate on each other or have a disagreement, and it's just so impressive. And it feels like a very honest reflection of life and that way that friendships change and come together and grow apart. There's been a lot of love for this book, and to be honest, I've not actually spoken to anybody so far who's read this and not kind of come out of it thinking, wow, that was amazing, that was incredible. For me, I think my responses to this book kind of fall into 3 different stages. When I read the first half, I was really enjoying it, really into it, and I got about halfway through, and some of the stuff that was happening in the book just got me so upset, and I actually couldn't deal with it. I had to put it down because it was making me too sad, and I was just thinking, like, this isn't fair. This isn't fair that these bad things are happening to this person, and I want to make it better and I can't because he's not real. So I had to stop reading the book and read some other things for a while. Then when I picked it up again, I kind of realised actually some terrible things are happening here, but it is so well written, and it is a page turner. Like, considering how long it is, it's incredible how much you're like, oh, okay, well, I need to keep knowing what's happening to these people. And I was really enjoying it, and I kind of didn't want it to end because I was just like, I was so into it in the second half of the novel. And then right at the end, when I just had 100 or so pages left to go, I think I started to feel a little bit exhausted by it, to be honest. I do think it's too long, and at the end I felt like it was very rushed, and the way things were tied up weren't very neat, and it felt like it was kind of zooming through to try and get to some kind of resolution. And I appreciate that life isn't always clean and poetic, and sometimes things just end and then, you know, things don't get better. But I felt that the way that things came together were slightly rushed and slightly messy. And to be honest, I kind of, by the time I got to those last few pages, I sort of wanted it to be over, not because I wasn't enjoying it, but kind of wanted just to know what happened. I think I'd just been reading it for so long by that point that I kind of wanted to see how it would end already. So I finished it with a sense of not being like, I am blown away, but because I'm thinking about this in terms of the other Man Booker shortlisted books, I'm trying to see how I think of its construction, and I actually don't think it's quite perfect, which is a shame, because and in terms of the response that I give to this book as a reader, like, it absolutely fulfills its goal, because I just feel completely invested in it and with the characters. So I guess to summarise, perhaps not 100% a perfect book. I couldn't give it 5 stars, I don't think, just because I think there are a couple of things in it that I would change, but oh god, like, if we're not thinking about it in terms of a competition, whether it will win a competition or not, just an amazing book, just amazing. If I was reading this and I didn't care about the Man Booker Prize, I would just be like, that was amazing. But trying to think about the author's construction kind of makes me view it in a very slightly different light, I suppose. So my arm is hurting after holding that book up. Those are the books that I read in September. Let me know if you've read any of them, what your thoughts are on them. But let's have a discussion, like, who do you think is going to win? Were you pleased with the shortlist results when they came out, or did you want something else on there? Look forward to hearing from you below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! Is so cool and so interesting. It's like Facebook posts and letters and texts, and then it's some belongings that they have together and pictures of things, and it just sounds like a really interesting